Well, as I'm sure you are, hopefully all open to the passage that we read today in Hosea 5. And as you had Batanba read it, I'm sure you thought, wow, this is quite a dark passage. And as I read it, in preparing it this week, I thought, how am I going to preach it? And it took a while, because I was reading it from my perspective and not God's perspective. And there were a lot of things I had to deal with. And there were a lot of times I had to throw my notes out. And there were a couple of titles. One was Beyond the Wrath of God and some big things like that. Ultimately, I had to settle on a title from another preacher who's not such a good example, and it's Always Been in You is my title, but you'll see why. You might recognize it if you've been on YouTube, but I'll talk about that later. But I'm going to talk about the point of no return today. The point of no return, because that's what this seems like, doesn't it? The point of no return. PNR. The point of no return. And that's what this is all about. I want you to think about what is the point of no return. Is there a point of no going back? In cars, you call it no takesies, backsies, you know? Do you think that you can go too far away from God? With our faithlessness, can we disrespect Him to our doom? You know, you might find a staggering number of us that will say, no. You know, a loving God would never let us go that far. But let's flip the coin on its head for a moment. Because who does the rejecting? Who does the inflicting of evil and pain on God's creation? The suffering in the world and upon ourselves, upon each other. And believe and worship and chase after other gods and even nothing itself. And then turn around and blame who? Not just God, but Yahweh, the God of the Bible. That's who we blame for all the evils in the world. Right? We don't go and blame Allah. We don't turn around and blame Buddha. We blame Yahweh for all the evil that we do. Or for all the evils that apparently happen. So is there a point of no return? And if so, in whose hands is that point of no return? It's surely in our hands. But this passage says that God's people have reached the point of no return. So what? So what? Is there hope? Is there hope? Well, I would hope so, right? Or there would be no gospel, there'd be no good news. Notice we're halfway through, right in the middle of the Bible. For even in this text that's filled with man's rejection of God and in his right judgment, we have the gospel. We have his plan to save us in this text. And I want to show it to you in this most remarkable and most loving way imaginable. You may not see it, but it's here. But we've got to see the ugly. To see the good. So verse 1 begins by addressing the priests, and this is important for later as well, because it's going to give us a challenge as believers. And it begins by addressing the priests and the royalty, the kings, the people of the people of God, who should be leading God's people correctly, leading them toward the Lord. But God says they have become a snare, they've become a net, they've become a trap. You know, they're catching all the fish. They've become the hunter of the people instead of their protector, instead of their caretaker. They've become, instead of their protector, instead of their caretakers, instead of their shepherds, they've become wolves. Opposites, right? And verse 2 is kind of confusing if you sort of read it. The revolters have gone deep into slaughter, but I will discipline them all. But it basically means that anyone who gets in their way gets mowed down. So anyone who gets in the way of these wolves gets mowed down. Tell me this doesn't happen by these prosperity teachers today. You say anything against them, you say anything against the Joyce Mayers, you say anything against the big teachers of false Christianity. But you know what? God will discipline them. And God will discipline me if I do the same. If I teach falsely and lead you astray, God will discipline me. And here's why. Verse 3. I know Ephraim, and Israel is not hidden from me. You know, we often take great comfort in knowing. And that is good, right? That God knows every part of us. He searches the inward parts. He knows us in and out. But it also should fill us with great fear. Because there's nowhere to hide. And we have the addition of these two main players, Ephraim and Israel. Ephraim is the son division from Joseph, and Israel is the other 10 tribes. This is important for a little bit later when I talk about something. Ephraim and Manasseh were the two sons of Joseph. And these are the people of God. I'm not going to go into a full explanation of every verse, otherwise we'll be here all day, but I'm going to get to the points. And like the king and the priest, Ephraim has led Israel from God, not unwillingly. But with her own deeds. So God's people reject God by her own deeds. In verse 4, as I said at the beginning, whose fault is it? It's by what we do. It's by our own choice. It's by what we want to do. It's by wanting our thing, but by our not wanting God. He says, because it is a spirit of whoredom in them. It is something in us. It's a spirit of not wanting God, but wanting something else. So there's this preacher. Now this is why I said I'd name the sermon something different. I don't even need to name this preacher, because he likes to sue everyone. Like I said, they like to mow everyone else. I'll probably name him anyway. I don't care. Got nothing to sue me for. And he likes to preach. He says, I am God Almighty. Stephen Furtick. I'll just say, because he says that. And his latest book says, it's in you. It's always been in you. He's very famous. It's in you. It's always been in you. And I agree with him. But it's not, I don't agree with him about what he says, what's in you. God's not in you. Good is not in you. I agree with Hosea. Sin is in you. It's brokenness that's in you and me. We're messed up. That's what's in you and me. We need help. That point of no return is in you and me. I'm a born screw-up. We need a God who loves us enough to set us straight, to love us right. He's wrong. There's a guy who says, it's always been in you, who says, I'm okay. There's a guy who doesn't need a God. Because he's already God. Here are people who need God. Look how far God's people had gone wrong, even under the old covenant. Up to chapter 7, we come to a problem. When I had read this, I thought at first that